Soccer is a game revered throughout the world, played on every continent, in backlots, schoolyards, and stadiums. And every 4 years, teams from around the world compete for the sport's greatest honor, the World Cup. More than 3,000 years ago, games involving balls, teams, and goals developed in Central America and Asia. It was played in ancient Greece and Rome. Every culture imbued the game with its own values. Some played to honor the gods, others to hone battle skills. In medieval England, the game was outlawed for its violence and threat to social stability. Over time, it was refined and adopted by the upper classes. In America, soccer developed its own distinct style in East Coast cities like Philadelphia, New York, and Fall River, Massachusetts. As the country moved west, so too did soccer, Americanized. Aggressive, fast, and tough. In the rapidly growing industrial city of St. Louis, European immigrants played a raw, competitive style of the game in the city's working-class Roman Catholic neighborhoods. In 1950, 5 of the city's best showed their passion to the world, representing America in a historic World Cup game against England. Through the 1960s and 70s, the homegrown teams of St. Louis University set the bar for collegiate soccer, creating a dynasty and spreading the popularity of the sport across the nation. Blue-collar, urban, and Catholic, they kicked their way from parochial playing fields to the halls of history. This is a story of a time when a sport became more than a game. The eighth sacrament, the priests called it. And generations of young Americans battled for neighborhood, parish, city, and country. It was a time for champions.
This program was made possible by the following.
Funded in part by the Tax Credit Program at the Missouri Film Commission, assisting filmmakers in Missouri since 1983.
Advising nearly 7 million individual investors through face-to-face meetings and long-term relationships, Edward Jones offers a range of investments and services. Edward Jones, making sense of investing.
In 1950, when the U.S. beat England in a World Cup match, 5 members of that amazing team called St. Louis home, just like Enterprise Rent-A-Car. We're proud to be from St. Louis and the city's great soccer tradition. Pick Enterprise. We'll pick you up.
Sports upsets have always been a part of popular culture. They appeal to our love of the underdog and our fascination with the unexpected. In the winter of 1980, the United States Olympic hockey team defeated the Soviet Union. It was the Miracle on Ice, a collection of amateurs and college athletes defeating the world's premier hockey team. Hardly anyone expected the New York Jets to beat the Baltimore Colts in the 1969 Super Bowl. The Colts had lost twice in their previous 30 games and came to the Super Bowl as the 18-point favorite. But the Jets had Joe Namath, who made good on his promise. We're going to win the game, I guarantee it. In 1919, America's favorite thoroughbred, Man O' War, lost his first race ever at the Sanford Memorial Stakes in Saratoga Springs, New York, to an unlikely challenger with the name of Upset.
Sports is a drama without a script, which means that there's always a possibility that things could go completely off script. And it's that possibility, not likelihood, but even if it's a remote possibility, that fascinates people about an upset. If the better team has an off day, if the lesser team has its best possible day, if some combination of skill and luck and happenstance all comes together, could it possibly happen? And every now and then it does.
Such was the case in the summer of 1950, when teams from 13 nations traveled to Brazil to compete for the Soccer World Cup. Many of their countries had been devastated by World War II. It was a time to rebuild and return to normalcy. It had been 12 years since the last World Cup, the 1942 and 46 games having been canceled because of the war. The favorites were Uruguay, Spain, Brazil, and England. The American team that made the 30-hour plane trip was a ragtag bunch. Weekend players for the most part, they had to take time off from their day jobs to compete for their country. 6 of the starters were from the East Coast, Philadelphia, Fall River, Massachusetts, and New York. The other 5 came from St. Louis, 4 from the same Italian neighborhood known as the Hill. It was the job of the U.S. Soccer Federation to put a national team together, and its president, Walter Giesler, was a St. Louisan who considered his hometown a soccer hotbed. The St. Louisans all knew each other and had played together for years in neighborhood and amateur games. Harry Keogh was a mailman, an Irish kid who learned soccer in the Spanish neighborhood he grew up in. Charlie Colombo, nicknamed Gloves because of his habit of playing in leather gloves, was a meat packer known for taking no prisoners on the field. Gino Pariani, a sheet metal stacker at a St. Louis can factory, married just 3 days before he left for Brazil. 2 of the St. Louis players had seen action in Europe. Frank Pee Wee Wallace spent 16 months in a German POW camp after his tank was set afire at Anzio. Goalie Frank Borghi was decorated for his actions as a field medic in Normandy and made his living driving a hearse. They were tough, they were good, and they knew it. But the challenge before them was daunting. They lost their first game against Spain in the tourney, 3-1. Next, they faced powerhouse England, and they had few illusions about the outcome.
If we gave them a good, hard game and made them really work hard to win, that would have satisfied, me personally.
I was hoping to hold them down at 4 or 5 goals, and the chances of us winning the United States was kind of weak. England was favored to win the whole thing that year, the World Cup. They were considered at that time the father of soccer.
The British had good reason to be confident. London bookmakers put the odds of an American victory at 500 to 1. U.S. Captain Walter Barr was from Philly, where he played soccer part-time and taught physical education at a junior high school. He knew that whatever his team had going for it, it wasn't polish.
And there was no question that we were not full-time professionals. Everybody worked, everybody played on the weekends. We never had professional training. You should never go on the field thinking there's no reason that we can't win this game. Something can happen. Lightning, a flood, a bad call by the official, a good bounce for you, a bad bounce for them.
From the beginning, the English owned the ball, playing their own style of cool and controlled stiff upper lip. But no matter how many shots they took, nothing got past American goalie Frank Borghi.
They could have had 3 or 4 goals in the first 20 minutes. They didn't get them. They hit the woodwork. Frank made some good saves. They didn't get a good bounce.
And then, 38 minutes into the game, a miracle occurred. An incredible exchange between Barr and teammate Joe Gachins.
The ball came to me and I collected it about 30 yards out from the goal, pushed it ahead a little bit and took a legitimate shot. I hit it fairly well, hoping to score a goal. Joe Gachins was in a lot of traffic and he somehow got to the ball and got a deflection on it.
Joe Gachins kind of dove out of a line of players. Dove out and the ball was coming and he lunged like that and the ball went in. It was just a 1 in a million, really.
And at halftime it said, US 1, England 0.
Photos of the goal itself are rare because most of the photographers stationed themselves at the American goal, assuming that's where the action would be.
Well, we thought it was great, but we also thought to ourselves, ooh, this is now we woke them up.
But the Americans' defense held strong. And then, with 8 minutes left in the second half, human wrecking ball Charlie Colombo blatantly tackled an English player, a move that could have changed the tide.
Charlie fouled the guy outside the penalty area, and he hit him pretty good because Charlie was capable of doing that. And it was an obvious foul.
That could have been a penalty kick. They could have thrown Charlie out of the game. There were no substitutions at that time. So if Charlie was thrown out, we're playing with 10 players, and without the key man in the back, Charlie, who was our, tough guy in the middle back there.
But Charlie says that the Italian referee says bono, bono, good play on Charlie's part.
Charlie, if his mother was playing center forward against him, she'd be in trouble. Charlie had great timing, knew how to hit the ball and the man almost simultaneously. So if you were a referee or something like that, you'd say, he hit the ball first, it wasn't a foul.
And when the final whistle blew, thousands of spectators poured onto the field, carrying Gachens and Borghi on their shoulders.
I thought the Buford came in. When they ran down on the playing field, they ran at me. I didn't know what was going on. In fact, I was trying to find a place to hide.
It was the world's favorite story. Little guy with heart and luck beats big guy.
I still think that's one of the great things about sports, that the best team doesn't always win. The best player doesn't always win.
In a way, I'm kind of sorry that something making me feel so good made the other guys feel so bad. Because I'm sure when the English went home, the guys said, how the hell them Yanks ever beat you guys? Stuff like that.
That victory, if you will, over England still resonates at an international level. I mean, that simply goes down as probably, if not the greatest upset, it would be in the top 2 or 3 in ever.
Flying back to London Airport after their unsuccessful visit to Rio, Britain's World Cup team has come home. It couldn't have been a very cheerful occasion for the footballers, however glad they were to be back, for the high hopes with which they'd set out had been well and truly shattered. Their failure, especially against America, is largely put down to poor shooting. Well, anyway, there it is, a big disappointment for all concerned.
Neither England nor the U.S. went on to win the Cup. That honor went to Uruguay. The Americans returned to their neighborhoods, their jobs, and their local soccer clubs.
This is a good shot here, isn't it?
Today, Harry Keogh and Frank Borghi live just a few blocks from each other and get together often to reminisce.
Joe, like I said, was face down at this time.
It wasn't until almost 50 years later that a book, The Game of Their Lives, brought their story to a new generation. Hollywood shot the screen version, dressing up St. Louis to look like the summer of 1950. Actors were cast in the roles of the local heroes who stood now on the sidelines, no longer young men, but still treasuring the memory of an afternoon in Brazil when they showed the world that Americans could indeed play the world's sport. In 1904, the eyes of the world were on St. Louis and its World's Fair, the nation's largest to date. A celebration of the 100th anniversary of the Louisiana Purchase, 62 nations participated, demonstrating the latest in technology, science, and agriculture. At night, dramatic displays of electric lights heralded a new and brilliant century. It was the site of the first International Olympics ever held in the United States. Soccer was one of the events, and though the Galt Football Club of Canada took the gold, 2 local teams, Christian Brothers College and St. Rose, came away with the silver and bronze. At the time, it was the country's 4th largest city. Boosters called it, optimistically, the Paris of the Midwest. Its main thoroughfare was the Mississippi River, and its levee was jammed with steamboats carrying passengers and goods from every corner of the country. In 1874, a bridge had been built across the river, the Eads Bridge, an engineering marvel, bringing the railroad from eastern cities through the heart of downtown and beyond to the west. Its factories produced beer, shoes, and tools for the rest of the country. It was a city of smokestacks and opportunity. Immigrants from Ireland, Germany, Italy, and Eastern Europe sought jobs and moved to its neighborhoods, bringing their languages, their religion, predominantly Catholic, and their favorite sport, soccer. The sport fit well with the competitive spirit of European immigrants, and it was a cheap game to play, requiring little equipment, few rules, and a vacant lot. Ethnic teams battled both on and off the field for bragging rights.
it was part of their life. They carried it in their baggage the same way they did family photos or sort of a lace shawl or a wedding dress. That's how important soccer was to them. And I think there's a very good case to be made by the end of the 19th century that soccer had become something much more than just a game. It had become almost a religion. There was a kind of sacramental quality about it, if you will.
Soccer became a tradition, passed on to a generation of young Americans growing up in the Depression, making do with what they had.
There really wasn't many organized games until you were about maybe 14 or 15 years old. There were no uniforms or nothing, you just played. So you just played soccer and, had a lot of fun, and hardly ever kept score.
If you grew up in St. Louis's Hill neighborhood during the Depression, two things were pretty certain. You were Italian, and you played a lot of sports. Frank Borghi grew up in this house on Marconi Street, just a few blocks from his buddy Charlie Colombo. This was Yogi Berra's boyhood home, directly across the street from another future baseball great and sports broadcaster, Joe Garagiola. The hill was rich in clay deposits, and the mines provided jobs. Yogi and Joe's father worked together in the neighborhood brickyard. Peter Berra came to America from Italy.
I got off the boat in New York. They said there's jobs open in St. Louis. He said, put me on it then. I want to go.
And while their fathers worked, the kids played baseball, football, corkball, bottle caps, and soccer.
We played a lot of sports. We really did. That's all we did, the kids. Never, as long as you didn't come home dirty, it was all right. When we played on the street, when we heard that 4:30 whistle, everything drops. Because you had to go and get the can of beer for your dad. You stop and then come back and play again. They got to have that beer on the table when you got there.
It was Joe Casino with the Southside YMCA who brought organized sports to the Hill. In 1925, Uncle Joe, as the kids called him, proposed to the parish priest that a sports program be organized to include every boy in the neighborhood. Tapping into existing rivalries, teams were organized according to city blocks, turning street gangs into teams. Yogi was in the Stags Athletic Club, and their clubhouse was a garage off an alley.
We had the Hawks, we had the Fawns, the Nightingale, the Panthers, the Wildcats, the Stags, and we all played against each other, soccer. We played with cleats on, hard cleats. If you ever got hit, you got hit. I liked it. I liked soccer. Wasn't that good, but I tried anyhow.
As Yogi put it in his inimitable style, neighborhood sports was good because it kept the parents off the street and the kids out of the house. Across the city, other leagues were taking shape. Parishes, factories, breweries, funeral homes, auto dealerships sponsored their own teams. And on weekends, crowds gathered to root for their boys. In the 1940s and 50s, many cities, particularly on the East Coast, produced excellent amateur teams who competed nationally. St. Louis's Kudus Funeral Home sponsored a team that won the National Amateur Cup for 6 consecutive years. One of its star players was Harry Keogh. Neighborhood kids who would later grow up to play amateur, collegiate, and professional soccer would come to city playing fields on weekends to watch them.
I mean, that's how it all comes together. You want to be like them. So how do you become like them? You go watch them.
During the generations we're talking about, the world seemed smaller. Soccer did not have a national profile. So the world of soccer seemed to almost be bounded by St. Louis, at least for a lot of the people here who followed it. But a huge percentage of the players they were interested in were right here. They had seen them. In some cases, they had played against them when they were younger and been outclassed by them, but they had firsthand knowledge of them. Maybe they saw them walking down the street or at the grocery store or at the corner bar. So there was something really local about it, and something where there was a personal identification to it.
So a kid from the neighborhood could actually share the field with a boyhood hero, a World Cup star.
We played against Simpkins, and Charlie Colombo covered me. And I remember going up for a head ball, and Charlie Colombo hit me like a truck. And I mean, I'm laying on the ground, just almost buried in the ground, and I look up at Charlie, and he's got that big hand with the glove, reaching down, helping me up, and he says, "Welcome to the big leagues, son."
The St. Louis Archdiocese, one of the largest in the United States, created through its Catholic Youth Council, perhaps the most highly organized soccer league of any American city. Monsignor Louis Meyer was instrumental in its development.
Some of my good friends would always say CYC was nothing more than YMCA sprinkled with holy water. But we felt it was just a little bit more than that.
You had priests come from Italy, you had priests come from Ireland. So there was a great influence from Europe into the city of St. Louis in the form of Catholicism.
In the seminary, the soccer field was the sacred place. We were ordained with a Bible in one hand, and we were ordained with a pair of soccer shoes in the other.
So neighborhood kids learned soccer as soon as they were old enough to kick a ball. And winning was serious business when the reputation of parish and neighborhood were at stake. And in a city of neighborhoods, competition was often defined by geography.
One of the virtues of soccer, and one of its concomitant vices, is that it's almost tribal. It's a very easy sport to understand. It's a very easy sport to turn into us versus them. And what's the simplest version of us versus them in St. Louis? From the middle of the 19th century, it's been North versus South.
And though a typical St. Louisan at the time probably couldn't describe essential differences between a North and South Side neighborhood, both typically old, red brick, and dominated by a steeple, the youngsters nevertheless took pride of turf seriously.
The neighborhood aspect of it is very strong. It's an immense part of it. It's the thread that runs constant throughout all the players, irrespective, north, south.
A lot of the parish were known by how good they were in athletics, and specifically in soccer.
The only reason for wanting to go into somebody else's neighborhood is so you can beat them at baseball or soccer or whatever. Remember, there used to be an old recruitment line: join the Navy and see the world. Well, join a soccer team and see the other side of St. Louis.
The CYC objective was to keep the kids within the steeple of the church. But I also want to see these kids hit the net. And I want them to use all their skills, all their talents, and all the strong feeling within them, the real gut feeling to hit the net. And that means you're a winner.
They were the boom years. And from the ashes of war, two superpowers went toe-to-toe to shape the world in their own image. This was a different kind of war, a Cold War. And America, buoyed by victory and driven by competition with the Soviet Union, geared up with the attitude that it could do anything. We would build cars, watch television, and go to the moon.
And I can imagine no action, no adventure, which is more essential and more exciting than to be involved in the most important and significant adventure that any man has been able to participate in the history of the world.
President Kennedy came to St. Louis to congratulate the workers of McDonnell Aircraft, which was building the Mercury space capsules that would take the first Americans into space. Corvettes rolled off St. Louis assembly lines to take America for a ride on the interstate highways. On the riverfront, a stainless steel arch, the nation's tallest monument, rose in celebration of the city's role as the gateway to the American West. And a new generation from working-class roots was heading to college. For young St. Louis Catholics in the late 1950s, the logical school would have been St. Louis University, a small Jesuit college located in the heart of town. It was a commuter school, allowing students from blue-collar families to attend college and live at home. It was their ticket to a better life, a chance to make a name for themselves. But as it turned out, they would make a name for the school. In 1959, the National Collegiate Athletic Association first offered colleges the opportunity to compete for a national title. For the past 80 years, college soccer had been dominated by teams from the Northeast: Penn, Harvard, Princeton, and Penn State. But the first NCAA championship was won by a Midwestern school.
The NCAA championship playoffs at the University of Connecticut on a wet Thanksgiving weekend. Sloshing toward the title, the Billikens of St. Louis University as they played the University of Bridgeport. This was the first full season for varsity soccer at St. Louis, and when they finally splashed that sodden ball into the goal, they had placed an unusual story in the annals of sports.
College soccer had joined the big leagues. And this first championship in 1959 marked a historic turning point, showing colleges throughout America that soccer had been taken to a new level.
St. Louis, they set the bar, and it was so much higher than the rest of us. That's when the rest of the colleges realized what they had to strive to achieve.
The victory came from out of nowhere. East Coast teams considered soccer their game. St. Louis University had only played soccer as a club sport for 1 year prior to the first championship. In 1958, Bob Gelker, executive secretary of the Catholic Youth Council, had approached the university volunteering his services as a coach. That year, the new team won 4 and tied 1. After the season, Gelker arranged an exhibition game against a Midwest All-Star team to be played in St. Louis. The All-Stars represented some of the best players in the country. But on a field blanketed with snow and ice, St. Louis beat them 3-1. The victory convinced the school they had the talent to play NCAA ball the following year. Gelker loved soccer, and though he'd never played it, he was an avid student of tactics on the field. As head of the CYC since 1946, he also knew every kid and every coach in the city, and he set out to recruit the best local talent.
He felt that he knew each player as they are and who they are, where they came from. And I think he had the vibes of knowing what the talent of a kid was.
I admired Bob Gelker for picking up a game and coaching it that he never really played or knew anything about, other than to pick up a book and look at the rules and start from scratch.
In its first year of varsity soccer, the program had a budget of $200 and no frills.
Nobody's on scholarship. Nobody got shoes. So they said, you're going to get meals. The team will get meals, all right? And only during the season, though. And they gave us 50 cents a day meal money.
But it was pride, not meals, that fed their desire to win. They were unique among college teams in that they were all hometown boys with something to prove.
Here in St. Louis, we knew soccer. We could defy the odds. We could play these other teams, and we could beat them. We wanted to show them that soccer in St. Louis is better than where they were from.
Going into that first championship in '59, St. Louis was handicapped by losing 3 top players because of eligibility rules and injury. When they arrived in Connecticut before the game, they found the accommodations to be less than first class.
They housed us in the locker room. Real locker room. I mean, what did we sleep on? Army cots.
The weather was its own sad story.
I mean, it was muddy and wet and cold and miserable, and the only people on the field were the coaches and the players, and that's it. I mean, it was just miserable, but that's where it really paid off to have these North and South Side guys there. They're used to playing that, and they just dug it out. They didn't care. I mean, nothing, just grind it out.
But at the end of the day, the score was St. Louis 5, University of Bridgeport 2. After the game, Bridgeport coach John McKeon said, it would take an all-star team picked from the other 3 semifinalists to give St. Louis anything like a close game. And though no one knew it at the time, it was the beginning of a dynasty. Some sports teams are known as Tigers, Bulldogs, or Bears. St. Louis University's mascot is the Billiken. So what is a Billiken? The chubby elf-like figure with pointy ears and a jovial grin was created back in 1906. And for about 6 months, Billikens were a national craze. By 1912, it had been adopted as the symbol of St. Louis U. Why is still a subject of local debate, but to this day, the Billiken is considered a bearer of good fortune. And prior to games, sports fans are known to rub the belly of their big bronze Billiken for luck. But it was more than luck that drove the St. Louis soccer Billikens onto future championships.
St. Louis was hard. They weren't dirty. They were hard, and every tackle, every 50-50 ball they fought for. And those guys played their high school ball in the winter. They didn't play in the fall, so even to be a member of the team and play on the ice and snow and the cold conditions, you had to be pretty tough mentally and physically. If you play it right, I mean, it's a non-stop game. You're going constantly. If you're not tough, they find out about it pretty quick. It was very, very enjoyable to watch. It wasn't necessarily enjoyable to play against because they were good.
The team had its outstanding players. There was All-American Jack Duker, who scored 3 of the 5 goals in the '59 championship game. Pat McBride and Carl Gentile would also go on to become All-Americans and later play professional soccer. But instead of relying solely on a few stars, Gelker shaped a band of former rivals into a united, competitive force on the field.
There was no need for anybody to be a superstar because everybody found a way to support one another. There was no glory hounds. Everybody was a part of it.
I think the one challenge that Bob Gelker had was to take a lot of players that had been competitors and opponents, et cetera, and came from different programs and different high schools, and have us prepared to play the Michigan States and University of San Francisco and the schools that relied as much on foreign talent as homegrown talent.
The teams we played against, the vast majority had at least 50% of foreign players. They all thought they were better than you. And there was no way we were going to allow them to beat us. And you were there to prove that, you know what, I'm not only as good as you, but we're going to show you as a team we're better. And usually we did.
If once an adventure was a trip across town, now the boys were playing teams across the country and visiting places like New York City, which meant Bob Gelker had to play a dual role, coach and chaperone. It wasn't always easy.
We had a great time. I mean, when we went on trips, we just, after the game was over, we just partied. And so when we said, hey, I'm going to New York, and Bob had put a 10 p.m. curfew, I mean, some of the guys I just bummed around with said, the hell with that. Let's go into New York City and let's party. And I remember him sitting in the lobby like at 12 or 1 o'clock waiting for us to come in. And we'd have to go up the fire escape to get in so we wouldn't pass Bob Gelker.
But they also had their serious side. In the fall of 1963, the team traveled to East Lansing to play Michigan State. 2 weeks earlier, the Spartans had beaten the Billikens 4-3.
That particular day was Friday, November 22nd, 1963. And one of our guys is late getting out of his room, and he's got the TV on, and it's 12 noon. And he comes running out to the bus and says, "You won't believe what they're saying on the news. The president's been shot." You know, we were young, he was young. It was the first president in my lifetime that you could actually relate to. Catholic family, young kids. He was one of us.
St. Louis beat Michigan State that day 2-0. but it was a victory with its own meaning.
Within ourselves, we focused on the tragedy, the little we knew of the tragedy of that day, and what we all decided individually was we would go out and we would play the best game of the season, and that is exactly what that game turned out to be.
Having taken the championships in 1959, 60, 62, and 63, the team had grown accustomed to victories. Gelker liked winning as much as his players, but he also wanted to promote the game across the country. And he knew that lopsided victories would not help anybody.
We would play different schools, and they were just getting the soccer program going, and we would be up 5-0 at the end of the first half, and the whole halftime talk was about, we've got enough goals. He wanted to make sure that that particular school, they weren't looking to drop the program because of a lack of success.
And not only did he never want to embarrass anybody, but he really believed in college soccer, the good of college soccer overall. And I think he felt that if he showed respect to what we'd call up-and-coming programs, that would help them in the long run, and it'd be better for the game in the long run. And so he followed that path.
So yes, there was compassion for the other teams, but at the same time, if you upset a St. Louis team, you better be willing to pay the price, because they could turn it on.
Coming into the 65 season, there was cause for concern. Only 4 players with game action were returning from the past year. It would be a time for rebuilding, at a point when other schools had begun recruiting St. Louis talent. But the underclassmen surprised everyone. Raised in the local soccer culture, they stepped up and kicked their way to the national championship, where they again faced arch-rival Michigan State, a team with 8 St. Louis players. The game, described as a CYC reunion, ended in another Billiken victory. It was the 7th year of NCAA championship soccer. The Billikens had qualified for every tournament, winning 5. They were the undisputed national college soccer powerhouse. And in 1965, they set a new standard, an undefeated season with 14 straight wins, no losses, no ties. In 1966, Bob Gelker left St. Louis U to head up a new soccer program at Southern Illinois University in Edwardsville, just across the river. He had left his mark, not just in St. Louis, but across the nation, and would be inducted into the National Soccer Hall of Fame. It was the beginning of a new chapter under a new coach, Harry Keogh of World Cup fame. Harry immediately hired longtime friend Val Palazzaro as his assistant. They'd played together on local amateur teams and were highly respected by a generation of boys who had grown up watching and imitating them.
Wait a minute. Bob Gelker's leaving St. Louis University? What's going to happen here? Well, here comes Harry Keogh and Val Palazzaro, people we idolized when they played for the Cuda Soccer Club. And the Cuda Soccer Club at that time, that was the team in St. Louis that put St. Louis on the national soccer map.
Harry was a player's coach. He knew what it was like out there on the field. And he knew that to win games, you needed more than good athletes.
He was my hero. Harry, I felt, had a special knack of taking 11 players and knowing how to place them, putting the pieces of the puzzle together to get the greatest effect from a team.
Harry and Val, they were both mailmen. So when they coached, it was a part-time job for them. So to make money on the side, they refereed high school soccer. Well, when you're refereeing high school soccer, you're seeing all the good players.
I was very confident, mostly if I got the right players, I wouldn't be able to screw them up necessarily. Because one thing is to recruit the players, and then is how to form them together the way, so that they play together, not just play, go running around the field.
But by 1967, the landscape was changing. The number of college teams was growing, and with more schools recruiting St. Louis players, the field had grown more competitive. The year before, the Billikens had not advanced to the semifinals for the first time. Former coach Bob Gelker proclaimed that the day of domination by any single team was over. Harry's first season was a tough one. 8 wins, 3 losses, and 2 ties. In 13 games, the team scored only 31 goals, fewer than any season in the program's history. But as the season progressed, the team adapted to the style and the expectations of their new coaches and made it to the finals, facing off once again against rival Michigan State in St. Louis. Joe Baum, who later went on to coach Michigan State, was a St. Louisan playing for the Spartans in that game. And he wasn't the only one.
In that team in 1967, we had 8 St. Louis, Missouri players. And it was a real good rivalry because you had a St. Louis nucleus here playing against St. Louis players who stayed home and went to St. Louis University.
And like Bob Gelker's first championship game in 1959, Harry Keogh's first was also fought on a muddy battlefield. But this time, it was even worse.
There's literally ice floating on the field. Snow is coming down sideways. The mail wasn't being delivered. How are we going to play soccer? Balls are flying all over, hitting people in the head. The ground, you can't stand up. It's continuing to snow. Now the snow's changed to rain.
And a player from St. Louis who was playing for Michigan State, Guy Bush, slid, like headlong into one of the goalposts or losing his footing, and might have been close to being knocked unconscious. And I think it was at that particular point they halted the game.
Well, you should have started the GD game to begin with, said Harry Keogh. Pardon me, coach? Nothing. So we were declared co-champions.
While college teams around the country were developing their programs by recruiting St. Louis players and athletes from other countries, Harry continued Bob Gelker's strategy of building the roster almost exclusively from neighborhood kids who had come up through the ranks of the CYC.
You are now a teammate with somebody you may not have liked too much, that you've been competing with the last number of years, whether it would be in high school, whether it was in juvenile soccer or whatever. But when you got on the Billikens, Harry always had a message, okay, we're now one team.
But the old rivalries died hard. And whether it was a game of pool or a post-game chugging contest, it was always Northsiders versus Southsiders. Harry and Val turned that into an advantage.
Some of our most competitive games during the season were in practice, playing against your teammates. And we really enjoyed lining up the Northsiders against the Southsiders. Of course, the coaches were from the South Side, and we'd keep playing till dark until his team either got a tie or a win out of it.
Wait a minute. We're freshmen, sophomore, juniors in college. We can't get by Harry or Val. You just couldn't.
Practices were serious business with no slacking. Everyone remembers one particular hill in the city park where they would drill daily, running up and down until they nearly dropped.
And then one time, down, up, down, okay, now, Harry Keogh, Billy McDermott, get Jim Leaker, put him on your back and come up the hill. Jim Leaker's 6'2", 6'3", 210. I can't put Jim Leaker on my back and come up the hill. Well, then I guess you can't play. Jim, come on.
The team showed their competitors a style of soccer that relied on tight control of the ball and aggressive, highly coordinated, constant attacks on the opponent's goal. Harry's objective was to shape a team that was as mentally focused as it was physically fit.
We had coaches tell us that they thought they were playing against 12 or 13 players on the field because our players never got tired, always putting pressure on the other team.
In 1969, the Billikens sailed through another undefeated season with no ties before playing Southern Illinois University Edwardsville in the first round of the national tourney. It was the first time Harry and Bob had faced each other as rival coaches. Southern Illinois was loaded with St. Louis players, and the Billikens wanted to show both coaches what they knew about soccer. And they did, beating the Cougars 4-0. In the final, they defeated San Francisco for their 7th NCAA title. They'd found their groove, motivated by the knowledge that they had a lot to live up to.
When I came to St. Louis U in 1969, They had already won 6 championships. So the bar was set pretty high when we walked on campus. And I certainly didn't want to be one of the guys or on one of those teams to let the program down.
They played for the name on the front of their jerseys, not for the name on the back of their jerseys. That's how our team played. They played for St. Louis University as a unit.
In the late 60s and early 70s, it seemed as if the fabric of America was unraveling. Many of its cities were in flames, torn by riots. With the memory of a murdered president still fresh, the nation lost 2 more of its heroes to assassination: the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. and presidential hopeful Robert F. Kennedy. Politics took to the streets at the 1968 Democratic National Convention in Chicago, where protesters clashed with police and the whole world was watching. Victory in Vietnam seemed far from certain, as more young Americans were pulled into a conflict they didn't necessarily understand or support. Attitudes about race, gender, and lifestyle were changing as a new generation made its voice heard loudly and clearly, demanding civil rights and personal freedoms. Amidst these turbulent times, a sense of order and clarity for America's college students was found in sports, where rules and battle lines are clearly defined, and at the end of the game, there is a winner and a loser. St. Louis University was no different, and the Billikens sought another national title.
A popular phrase in soccer is that the way you are is the way you play. And the way most of us was coming from a working class background. And that's the type of working class attitude you brought to your abilities as a soccer player.
It wasn't just that St. Louis University teams wanted to win. They hated losing. As kids, they fought for their parishes. As Billikens, they defended the honor of their city.
Anybody from outside of St. Louis tries to say anything about a St. Louis team or a St. Louis player, be careful, because they were very, very protective and very, very proud.
In 1970, the Billikens, heavy with freshman starters, beat UCLA, a team that consisted almost completely of foreign players, for their 8th national championship. The following year, the final game was between St. Louis and Howard, a historically black school in Washington, D.C., which also had a largely foreign lineup. Howard beat them 3-2. It was their first loss in 45 games, dating back to 1968. Almost 40 years later, it still hurt.
I'm always disappointed when I think about the 71 final and losing to Howard. It's kind of like that's the game that has stuck with me the most. It's kind of like unfinished business.
However, later the NCAA's governing council determined that some members of the Howard team were in violation of rules governing proper eligibility and vacated the 1971 title.
Harry respected the fact that NCAA took the championship and vacated it, if you will, but he's not the kind of person that would run around and lobby and say, hey, look, I think you should award it to us. For Harry, you move on, and it's about the next game. If you talk to Harry, the most important game's the next game.
The next big game came the following year at the Orange Bowl, when St. Louis faced UCLA in the final round for the title. After the loss to Howard the year before, the Billikens had something to prove, and tensions on the field were high. Early in the second half, it got out of hand.
We were winning. We were up either 1 or 2 goals, and they scored, and then it got kind of ugly.
The guy who scored, I think he either did a little too much celebration or said something to one of our players, and our guy kicked him. The police were out on the field with police dogs. Some guys were streaming out of the stands to get into the fight, and it got pretty wild.
All I know is I was trying to break it up, and when it was over, we had 2 players gone from the game, both from concussions.
Finally, they restored order, and we went on to win the championship. We beat them, I think, 4-2.
The following year, the 2 teams faced off again, and St. Louis took the title 2-1 in overtime. Over a period of 15 years, St. Louis University had won 10 NCAA Division I championships, 5 under Bob Gelker and 5 under Harry Keough, who, along with Gelker, was inducted into the National Soccer Hall of Fame. The Billikens were America's first college soccer dynasty, and its string of titles has not been equaled since. But 1973 would be the last championship year for St. Louis. Though future championships would elude St. Louis, it wasn't because of a decline in the quality of the team. Over the past 36 years, the Billikens have won over 70% of their games, qualified for all but 5 NCAA tournaments, and produced 48 All-Americans.
Well, I don't think it was the end of their dynasty as much as them creating their own monster by being so good.
Jerry Yeagley was the one that started the program at Indiana, you know. And when he started the program in Indiana is when we start losing players from the St. Louis area.
When we became varsity in 1973, the first trip I made to recruit when we had any kind of scholarship aid was right to St. Louis. And our team has never been without a St. Louis player. And as a matter of fact, many of the times our team had half our starting lineup from St. Louis.
Recruiting became tougher because some of the better players went to the other, you know. And at one time, I could just go, come on, guys, and that was it. And it wasn't that easy later on.
More teams with more scholarships to lure St. Louisans to play for them had raised the level of competition to the point that no single team could any longer dominate the sport. College soccer's gain might have been the Billikens' loss, but St. Louis was there first.
Soccer has only gained true national prominence in the United States in the last generation and a half. But well prior to that, St. Louis was a hotbed. So as the rest of the country began to become more interested in soccer, especially at the youth level, with kids playing from kindergarten all the way through high school, they were playing catch-up with St. Louis. The idea of soccer moms and a soccer craze in this most recent generation, in St. Louis, that was old hat.
And though in America, soccer might not ever reach the popularity of football, basketball, or baseball, Americans have shown that they too can excel at the world's game and adapt an old sport to a new world. A generation of American women has embraced the game and excelled in college programs, amateur leagues, professional teams, and international competition. From its humble beginnings in city schoolyards and neighborhood parks, soccer has grown over the past 30 years into the nation's most popular organized sport among boys and girls across America.
Soccer is a game I think players should learn how to dance, to learn great grace and agility. It is an art. It is indeed.
I think it's a very unpretentious sport. You walk on the field and there are no secrets, there are no mysteries, and I think it's a very open, honest type of a game.
It's about life. And a lot of people consider soccer life, and that is their life, the game.
Soccer is a simple game of kicking a ball into a net. But there is drama in the attack and determination in the defense. It is a game of grace and grit. And when we speak of its champions, their glory lies not in victory alone. It lives in the spirit that compels them, even against the odds, to find those moments in their lives that prove whoever they are, wherever they come from, they are the best.
If we gave them a good, hard game, that would have satisfied me, personally.
You should never go on the field thinking there's no reason that we can't win this game.
St. Louis was hard. They weren't dirty, they were hard.
If you're not tough, they find out about it pretty quick.
Popular phrase in soccer is that the way you are is the way you play.
We wanted to show them that soccer in St. Louis is better than where they were from.
I also want to see these kids hit the net. Hit the net. And that means